Hey everybody, I'm here today with my new guest, Lynn, and you just told me how to pronounce your last name, and I already forgot.
Zubernis. Yeah, you got it.
I got it, Lynn Zubernis. And Lynn is attached to one of my favorite fandoms, Supernatural. And you're also a professor.
I am.
And you're a professor of?
I'm actually a professor of psychology at Westchester University.
Oh, that's a really interesting look into fandom, isn't it?
It's a perfect match. It really is. I couldn't help myself.
Well, why don't you jump right in and tell me a little bit about, actually, let me ask you a question first. Supernatural is one of the biggest fandoms online. I mean, whenever there's a poll, a contest, whatever, we come full force to support our fandom. But relatively speaking, the show itself is a pretty small show on a pretty small network.
True.
How do you account for that?
I mean, I don't think there's necessarily a correlation, even though it seems like there should be. Some of the most popular shows don't really have much of an organized fandom, but it's the shows that really pull for the passionate fandoms, not necessarily the biggest, most watched, most popular shows, but the ones that pull for that kind of passion that end up having the most online and social media presence. And so, of course, they come out and we do a great job with things like polls or getting People's Choice Awards or things like that.
So it's a much bigger question, but in a short version, what is it about Supernatural that makes people passionate? What is it that pulled people in, even though it, like I said, isn't the highest rated television show?
I've written 2 whole books on that, so it's a little hard for me to condense it, but I think Supernatural is sort of the perfect storm of a bunch of things that really pull for people to be passionately invested in them. It's the right genre. The things that pull for people to be invested are often in the fantasy or the science fiction genre, and I don't think that's a coincidence. I think one of the things that makes people passionate is that they can invest in something that encourages some kind of, psychologists would say projection, but some kind of fantasy. So in order to really personally invest in a show and have it be meaningful, a show, a book, a film, whatever, it's got to leave you some room for going in. So the fantasy or the sci-fi genre is perfect for that. And then I think Supernatural has some messages that make it very emotionally resonant for people. It's got the family message, it's got the loyalty message, it's got the sort of everyday people up against supernatural, superhuman odds, which is how we all feel sometimes. And then it's got some really good-looking people on it.
That, and you can't put that aside at all,
nope,
of course.
It's part of it.
And I think it might be part of it what pulls someone in the first place, but they stay for those other things you mentioned. They might come in because they like the actors or they like spooky shows, and then they stay on because they find it something a little deeper than that.
Exactly. I mean, I don't think I know anyone, and we've met, tens of thousands of fans of Supernatural at this point. I don't think I know anyone who is solely invested in looking at the pretty.
Yeah, and it's very interesting how all of the fantasy shows, particularly the ones that have held on for years, Star Trek and Buffy and those kinds of things, tend to be fantasy shows. There certainly are some fandoms for straight dramas, but they don't seem to ever really get to the depth that we look at for fantasy shows. I mean, I can't think of a convention like Grey's Anatomy, for example, obviously has a lot of followers or people really invested. It was an emotional show people could be passionate about, but I don't know of a Grey's Anatomy convention that people would pay $800 to go see.
No.
Maybe they would have. I don't know, but maybe no one did one.
No, I don't think so. Because, those are the shows that are most popular, but I think people watch those shows in a different way. They're sort of the more, I don't know if casual viewer is the right word, but they're watching it differently. They don't get up after seeing Grey's Anatomy and say, oh my God, I have to get online and see if anybody wrote some fan fiction about that. Or I don't have to write a meta on the meaning of that. It's a different pull. You watch it, it's fun, it's nice. Maybe you talk about it the next day at the water cooler at work, casually, but you don't have that desire to really immerse yourself in the world.
And that's fascinating because I always feel that I have two kinds of shows that I'm passionate about, and I call them my fanish shows, and then the non-fanish ones. And a good example of this is the Canadian series Flashpoint, which I just love, and it's a show that when I sit down to watch, I am sucked in. I'm like sitting literally on the edge of the couch with my knuckles into my mouth, going oh by the end of every episode. But I don't turn around and go online and look for fan fiction or look for fan communities. I don't. I love that hour. I really enjoy it, but it's not an experience I feel like I want to extend. And I've never understood why that is, but yeah, it's definitely something that happens.
Yeah, I think everyone has had that experience. There's only a few things, and it's different for every person, but when that perfect storm occurs for you, that's when you get pulled into fandom. And you know, I haven't really been passionate about very many fandoms. This is my first run at organized fandom, if you will. So it wasn't until Supernatural that it was the perfect storm for me of everything that it resonated in a personal enough way that I just had to go have more of it. And I think also, in some ways, it has to be somewhat incomplete, which that sounds like it's a criticism, but it's not. There has to be a point of entry where you want to explore something further. Something is not quite completely explained, which I think Supernatural does a fabulous job of. Nothing's ever completely explained. So you want to go on and make more of it and figure out what the gaps are and fill them in.
Well, that's also a very interesting point, because a lot of the fandoms, I've been in fandom, I don't even want to say how many years of different fandoms, but what's interesting is I found that it was easier, particularly from a fan fiction standpoint, of which I'm a big writer, for older TV shows, the 60s and the 70s, and I had come to the realization it's because TV back then was very nonlinear, to the point where it could be frustrating. You could have, there's a brother of a character on, episode 13, and then in episode 16 he says he's an only child. Yes. That was quite common.
That's true.
And less common now, particularly because of DVDs and things like that. I think they're more conscientious about the fact that people are going to be able to rewatch and keep things together. But there were a lot more holes. One of my earliest fandoms was Rat Patrol TV series, which you may or may not know. But But it was a half-hour war show, which right there tells you how little backstory there ever was in an episode. But it was 4 characters, so you had that sort of bromancy element. 4 guys out in the desert, all alone against the bad guys, fighting the good fight. And in rare exceptions, you got a little bit of the background of any of these characters, a little bit about their home lives or what they brought with them to the war. And I came away every episode wanting to know more. I'd get one little bit. Somebody would mention a mammy, a Southern boy who talks about having a mammy raise him, and I go, I want the rest of that. Since I couldn't have it.
Yeah, but I think that's really important. It has to be the right balance of you're not so frustrated that you just walk away going, what the hell's happening here? I don't understand any of this, because that's not going to pull you in. But you can't know everything. And yet the characters have to be so compelling that you want to know everything. With Supernatural, every time there's a tiny bit of backstory about the boy's childhood, everybody will go, oh my God, what does that mean? Do you think this meant that Sammy was left out of the hunts? And did they leave him in the car? And what happened when Dean came back for him? That's the kind of stuff that really pulls people in.
Absolutely. And so when you say you dived in, you really... You really immersed yourself.
On every level, personally, professionally, it really took over.
So tell me a little bit about this project. You're working on a new book with a partner. Tell me about that.
So the new book we're working on it's actually done, and we have a contract with a publisher, and it's coming out in October. It's called Fangasm. And Fangasm is actually the book we originally set out to write. We started almost 7 years ago now, when my co-author, Kathy Larson, who's an English professor at GW University, we fell into Supernatural at the same time and sort of stepped back and said, what the hell is happening to us? We've never been this insane about anything ever. So we decided to figure it out. And we hit the road and started going to conventions and talking to fans, and had a lot of very interesting and somewhat embarrassing misadventures along the way. And eventually decided, in order to really figure it out, we had to talk to the people who were making the show too. So we ended up interviewing all of the actors and going to the set a few times and sort of getting the behind the scenes story too, so that we would have the story from both sides. So Fangasm it's a memoir, and it's our 5-year road trip through fandom, researching all this and all the ridiculous situations that we got ourselves into. But it's also got a lot of, fan psychology in it as we tried to figure out what was going on with us and everyone else. And it's got a lot about the show, and it's got lots and lots of interviews with Jared and Jensen and Misha and them. So hopefully it will be something of interest to all Supernatural fans, and I think just fans in general, because it tries to make sense of what being a fan is all about, especially for women. It's all about fangirls.
My favorite people.
My favorite people.
And how crazy is it that you can even say numbers like 5 years and 7 years? And I mean, I remember watching the very first episode of Supernatural. I had been a big Buffy fan, so it pulled me in from that. And I never expected that it would last. I thought it'd be lucky if we had a couple years out of it, because it was so different from what we'd been seeing on TV. And here we are. How many seasons later?
Yeah, coming up on 9. No, it's amazing. I remember in the early years, at the end of every season, we would all be apoplectic because we would be so sure that there was not another season coming. So, it's very different now. And I'm very grateful that it's gone 9 seasons, because I never thought it would take us this long to actually get the book published. We went through all kinds of incarnations. We ended up publishing an academic book on Supernatural fandom called Fandom at the Crossroads 2 years ago. So that one came out long before, and then finally got a bigger publisher to pick up this one.
Excellent. And what's interesting about this fandom as well, and it really ties into what you were doing, is that the cast and the crew are very fan friendly.
Amazing. It took us over a year of research before we actually sort of hit on the idea of, maybe we should actually talk to the other people and see how they feel about being fanned, and how do they feel about fans, and what's going on here from that other perspective. But I don't think we ever expected anybody to be so amazingly welcoming and candid and so curious. Every time we would interview someone, they would ask us as many questions as we would ask them.
And certainly a lot of that has had to do with the growth of social media. I compare a lot my Supernatural experience with my Buffy experience. And Buffy, as much as it seems like it wasn't that long ago, was a very forum-based fandom. It was back in the days of Yahoo groups,
right? Where
now Supernatural is a lot of live journal. It really flourished there. Now Tumblr, but also a huge portion of it is Twitter, Facebook to some extent, but I think particularly Twitter, where so many of the actors and the people behind the scenes, communicate on a daily basis.
Yeah, it's completely different, and it's been interesting to watch the evolution, to be immersed in one fandom. We decided early on if we were going to research fandom and be involved in the field of fan studies, we wanted to do it differently than anybody else had done it, because academics tend to sort of stay on the outskirts and look down from above and use their magnifying glass. And we didn't want to do that. We felt you couldn't really understand fandom unless you were immersed in it. And there are too many fandoms. You had to pick one and to really be immersed. So we dove into Supernatural. But that's really given us the most fascinating view of its evolution from the inside. Going from when we started, it was still sort of the Supernatural TV forum, and the Television Without Pity forum were where we started, and then moving through Live Journal, and then eventually, Facebook, and then Twitter and Tumblr, and it's changed everything. It's totally fascinating.
And the other part of this are these conventions, as we've mentioned. Supernatural, particularly at the moment, I would say has more conventions a year than any other TV show.
It does. It does.
Not only just what Creation's doing here in the U.S., but they were just in Australia a week ago or so.
Yeah.
In Italy a week or two before that. Germany. It's all over.
I think there's 8 of them in the United States and 10 of them or 11 of them in Europe. And it's way more than any other property. It's unprecedented.
So as much as we hate to think about what happens when it's over.
What, Cynthia?
Well, one of the things we've been discussing with our little minions lately is, we saw, as you were saying, the evolution's amazing. We saw the conventions go from, there were maybe 2 a year. They had that Chicago show, and then they added another. And, people, it was an event. You saved up and you spent your weekend there.
Yeah.
And then they started adding more cities and expanding out, and it's become a bigger and bigger thing. And now there's almost one, like almost every other month you could find a supernatural convention.
I go to all the U.S. ones, so let me tell you, the fall semester for me is insanity because I'm trying to teach and constantly running off to supernatural conventions. Not that I'm complaining. It's a wonderful part of my job, but it's unbelievable.
So it's enormous. And then when you add in the other things like Comic-Con, which is not technically a supernatural convention, but Comic-Con and the upfronts and the other places where these, the actors appear, sometimes it's a wonder they have any time to film because
it's a good thing. It's a good thing they're young and healthy. That's all I can say, because I would be exhausted if I were them.
But so what's going to be really fascinating to see is the other end of this. As look at Star Trek, which has lived on all these years, and there's still conventions, but certainly not to this extent. And it's kind of a fascinating, again, cultural thing to see what the other end of this hill looks like,
as it tapers off.
Yeah, a few conventions a year.
Yeah.
Maybe then it becomes a reunion every couple of years.
Yeah, I'm actually looking forward to following that part too. And I've actually had, because there's so many fans who know that I come at this from the psychology standpoint, there's already a lot of fans who are really worried about what it's going to be like when this tapers off, because we write about, in a non-pathologizing way, that there's certainly parallels between being a fan and having an addiction. It is kind of an addiction model, and as you start to not be able to have as much of it, that's kind of scary when it's fulfilling some pretty big emotional needs for a lot of people. So people are worrying about that already. What's the tapering off going to be like? And from both sides, what's it going to be like?
Yes, it's very true. We were talking with people who are listening to this podcast will have heard in their first portion talk about the convention last week that Matt, who plays young John Winchester, was at, and extremely popular, in the center of attention. He obviously really enjoys it, and I'm not saying that in a bad way. It's wonderful that he connects with the fans. But, here's a young guy whose whole, real fame has come from a character he played a couple of times, let's face it, not even that often, on the show. And this has got to be there have to be days where he wakes up and goes, what in the world?
Absolutely. Almost every interview we've done with the people, not Jared, Jensen, Misha, but the people who had guest roles on Supernatural and who now have made the convention circuit almost a job in itself right now. They all have very interesting things to say about it, and they are all just still, even now, years down the road, blown away by it and just unbelievably grateful.
That's a great word, because grateful. I feel like that is something that across the board I've always felt from everyone that I've had connection with for the show as well. And I've interviewed, I have to say, I don't know how much you know about my background. I've been an entertainment reporter for almost 20 years now, and the people that work on Supernatural are amazingly gracious about what they've got and about the fans that follow them, and they're the people who understand that the fans kind of keep them where they are. And then maybe that sounds a little bit stuck up, but it's kind of true.
And they all say it. I mean, you have a better perspective than I do because I'm new to this and haven't interviewed people outside of Supernatural. I've done a lot of interviews, but they're all Supernatural. So I think my viewpoint is sort of weirdly skewed, that these are just the nicest, most humble, most grateful, most thoughtful, insightful people. I have other friends who are in the entertainment industry, so I know that's not the case with everyone in the entertainment industry. But really, I don't know if it's sort of a miraculous casting agent who just found such a group of really nice, I want to kiss them, whoever they are, because really, we have not had a bad experience with any of the cast or crew. Not a one.
It's true. I can't think of anything, I can't really think of anything that stands out there. And I think some of it comes with being on on, sort of the little show that could. And this was Buffy's experience originally too. They were always barely hanging on. They were a little bit of the media darling at the beginning, but nobody really quite knew what to make of them. And they really were invested in doing something really cool and different. They didn't even realize how cool and different at the time. But they were all really felt sort of empowered by the fact that every day they had a job because it wasn't a certainty.
Yeah, well, in that industry, as you know better than I, that's not the norm. You are unemployed more often than you're employed.
Right, and that's why I think it's so funny that the actors, the supporting actors that spend an awful lot of time at the conventions, some of them have not even reappeared, as it were, on the show since they did their last convention. I mean, some of them haven't been on for years.
Oh, yeah. Some of them were on once or twice and became a fan favorite on the convention circuit, and that was that. And now, I haven't written about this yet, but I need to do a blog post on the Fangasm blog about this, because it's also fascinating to me that what's happened between the cast parallels what's happened with the fans. As the cast went to all these conventions, they have now become like a family. They are all best friends. They hang out together when they're not at conventions. They all know each other's families. They travel together. They never even, most of them worked on the same episode, so they didn't know each other from the show. They know each other from the convention. So just like fans have made some of their best friends, meeting other fans, these actors have made, lifelong friends from doing the conventions. It's pretty interesting.
It's funny. Yeah, it is. And when you say it that way, it's as if they've become their own little fandom for each other. Yeah. So I don't know how to quite put it.
It's true.
It's that same microcosm.
They're aware of that. We've chatted with Richard Spate and Matt Cohen, who are two of the people we know the best and are very, very thoughtful when they talk about these things, and they're absolutely aware of it.
And which brings me in a little bit about this whole concept of fanish friends, which is something that outsiders, if I can use that term, don't get. And, the fact that you could feel as invested in, as attached to someone who you have never met face to face, as someone that you work with every day, or that a friend that you've known since childhood.
Yeah. Well, I still remember the first time that I told my dad that I was actually going to rendezvous with someone who I knew from online, and his comment was, "Well, what makes you think you'll be safe?" Because he just assumed that somebody that you meant online could not, be valid. But really, I mean, there's some of this in Fangasm, certainly, and in Fandom at the Crossroads. But sometimes, because you meet not face to face, and because you share this thing that you're very passionate about, people tend to be more real online sometimes in their initial relationships, and to divulge things that maybe they wouldn't, and to be more their real self than they might be in real life. So the friendships that you make with Spanish friends turn out to be some of the most intense and the most genuine.
That's fascinating. And what's funny though about that is how many people know each other by their fanish names, as it were, particularly if you come from LiveJournal, where most people are using a name that is not their actual name.
Yes.
The experience of being at a convention and having to introduce myself two ways to everyone. Here's who I really am, and here's who you know me as.
Well, you'll get a kick out of Fangasm, because a large portion of the book is devoted to Kathy, my co-author, and I trying frantically to figure out who we are at any given moment, because we don't want to reveal who we might possibly be on LiveJournal. We want to stay in our academic selves because we don't feel like they mix, and we feel like that'll sort of mess up the research. But then we're running, half the people we're running into know us as one name, half the people know us as another, almost nobody knows us as, but it's very confusing. So we have fabulously, hysterically funny moments of identity crisis where we generally make fools of ourselves.
I totally relate, especially earlier on in my career where I was a reporter, and as little as really 10 years ago, the studios and publicity people didn't appreciate you being a fan and a reporter, which seems ridiculous.
But I would say that has not completely changed, and when you read Fangasm, you will be illuminated in some of those things as well.
Well, and that was the thing. When I would go, I remember the first time I spent a large amount of time on the Buffy set. I was actually working for Buffy magazine, and I would respond about an episode or something, and they would look at me like I had two heads and go, Oh, you watch? I was thinking like, well, of course.
Which is, I know, it's ridiculous. When we wrote for Supernatural magazine, we were the only ones writing, and we only wrote, 4 or 5 guest articles. We were the only ones writing for the magazine who actually were fans, but they had no idea we were fans. I assure you.
Well, that's the point. And so yeah, and it is funny though about this these alter egos that we build, and a lot of mine is, it may seem like I'm trying to cover one or the other, but it's really just more about I'm trying to find the straight route from point A to B to explain to you who I am, kind of thing. And there's these markers, that for a while I used to write. I sadly wish I would do more. I used to write a lot of fan fiction, and there were points where I would say my name to people and they'd go, oh, you're the one who wrote that story. And amazingly that's the connection. They would know.
Oh, yeah.
And I think I said to you that I'm the one that worked on 10-Inch Hero. I think that was the connection I tried to feel.
That's the way I knew your name, because Betsy Morris is a friend who's the screenwriter of 10-Inch Hero. So I knew that I knew your name from somewhere. That's where it was.
And talk about having to hide your fandom. Let me tell you, I had several embarrassing moments of trying to really hide the fact that I was a Supernatural and a Jensen fan when I found myself working on a movie where he was the star.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's definitely not acceptable.
No, there are lines that it's very complicated to cross, and there are assumptions that people will make depending on what your role is, and some roles just don't mesh very well. A lot of fandom at the crossroads is about shame, and about how women in particular try to juggle a lot of multiple roles, and they don't mesh well, and ones that are very real and involve a lot of our hidden selves, which our fanish identities often do, we're still very ashamed of them. They don't mesh well with a lot of the rest of our lives, professional, personal, relational, whatever.
Gee, you need to come. We have another podcast discussion scheduled called People at Work Don't Understand Me, and then another version about how proudly you show off your fanishness. And it sounds like you've delved into all those conversations,
yes,
which is great.
Absolutely, we have. Yeah, it is quite wonderful to be a psychologist who studies fandom and is also a fangirl, because I'm constantly studying everybody else and then putting my psychologist hat back on and turning it on myself and trying to figure out what's going on with me. So it's endlessly fascinating.
I'd like to take a little short hop over a little bit deeper into this concept of fan fiction, which is an enormous part of Supernatural fandom, and all fandoms, I think, but certainly there. And that's one of those, again, those weird cross the line places, is that when I started publishing not fanfic, I don't even know what to call it anymore. When I published a romance novel, I wanted people to know my history, that I had come from fan fiction, and I felt that had really helped me hone the ability to tell a good story. But everyone across the board said, you don't want to say that, because you don't want anyone to know that you used to write like fan fiction for fun, like that thing's not a good thing.
Yeah, well, it used to be the kiss of death, but that's basically because there was the misconception out there that fan fiction is poorly written, when honestly I think fan fiction has spoiled me for most published fiction, because fan fiction is so much better. Not all of it, but a lot of it is just incredibly well written. So it's hard for me to read, tie-in novels and things like that, because I end up saying, I can find much better fan fiction online. But I think, as much as 50 Shades of Grey might not be the most well-written either, the thing that it did do, which I think is important, is that it took away some of that stigma. You can't really say anymore, fan fiction, nobody would pay for that, nobody would buy that, it's not well written. The biggest bestseller of the last decade was fan fiction. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So as much as I don't think it's fabulously maybe written, I don't know, whatever, but still, it did something very important.
So what I wanted to ask you about, you're familiar with the Amazon Kindle world?
Oh, yes.
So what's your thought on corporatizing, as they're calling it, fan fiction?
My publisher keeps saying, aren't you going to write a blog post on this? Don't you want to write a blog post on this? But I've really been digesting all of the wonderful, wonderful meta that's been written. If you look at, it's a complicated thing, because certainly fan fiction is important. And while the gift economy of fan fiction, I think, is a wonderful and freeing thing, I also think people should be allowed to make money, and women who write most fan fiction should certainly be allowed to make money whenever they can. But if you really look at the terms of this, the chances of actually making any money seem pretty slim from the analysis that I've read. And the idea that they have so much, 100% power over taking your ideas and your characters and wherever you might have the story go, I mean, it's theirs. And I don't know what that means down the line. Does that mean that if you decide to write a sequel, that's theirs too, and you can't write it? Does that mean if other people take your characters or your ideas, fandom is great with its swaps and its follow-ups and its podficking of fan fiction. We all share. That's not going to be possible if somebody else owns all of this. And I just think the potential for it is kind of scary.
Well, and what's interesting, though, about that, and you mentioned tie-in articles, tie-in novels before, which I actually come out of that field, tie-in writers are all work for hire.
Exactly.
They don't own anything they made. So even when they write a supernatural book with this great secondary character they've invented, they don't own that character.
Yes, and I actually just had some of this discussion over Twitter, appropriately enough, with John Passarella, who also writes some great,
I know, yep,
some great tie-in novels. He's a great guy. But the difference there is that at least you've negotiated a contract that's fair and gives you, you're going to make something from that. You're probably not going to make $1 million. You're not going to write the written next 50 Shades of Grey, but you're going to get a fair deal. Whereas it looks like this is sort of, I mean, it kind of looks like Amazon has found a way to get people to write their tie-in novels for free.
True, but I will bring up this last point on that, which is, honestly, though, what do you really think are the chances that clause is ever going to come into effect?
I can't imagine them enforcing it broadly in any way, but it still makes me nervous.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I could see that, and I think that the one thing they're doing, which I thought was really fascinating, if I understand it, it's I think that it's written in language to make it very understandable for everybody and simplified, and maybe the details aren't as well described as they could be. But it does, from what I understand, is they're splitting profits between the license holder and the writer and Amazon.
Yeah, I think the weird thing is the way and I'm really pulling from other people's analysis here, so if I get it wrong, it's because of the analysis that I'm pulling from, but because they can set, it's from net profits, and they can set the price to make the profits whatever they want, including zero, it would be very easy theoretically for them to make sure you never made anything.
Yeah, I suppose. I self-publish on Amazon outside of the fan fiction era. So I guess I feel like it's really not very far off from the same manipulation they could be doing with any other thing that you post. So, I feel like it's just another move into the whole ebook field and self-publishing field, which is just opened so much up for people, because prior to this, you didn't have a lot of options, and there were a lot of scammer options. There were an awful lot of people that would charge you $3,000 to claim to, put your book online.
That's a very good point. Yes, very true. And I don't think this is a case of evil empire. They're not trying to do anything like that. And that it is better than that. You're right.
Yeah. And it may not fly. It'll go, and like you said, may find that people go in thinking, I'm going to make a ton of money off of this, and realize that they don't, and that could be the end of the whole concept.
That's why I'm not willing to say, oh, nobody should ever do this, because people make decisions for different reasons, and it may be quite compelling for some people to just see their writing as published by Amazon. Like that in itself is reinforcing. So as long, I guess, as it's explained well enough that fans are going into it with their eyes open and understanding what they're getting and what they're not getting, then I don't have a problem with it.
And I think the other side of that is that readers have to go in with the understanding that this is potentially the same thing that you read on LiveJournal or on fanfic.net. It hasn't been edited by Amazon. It hasn't been looked over to see if it's any good. It could be a whole book full of drivel. I mean, they make sure you didn't just put one word on every page.
Right.
But they're not editing your work.
No.
So you could put up as much as the reader could be buying a bad book as well as they could buy any bad book.
I feel like somebody wrote somewhere, I've lost where I got things from, but somebody wrote somewhere that the chances of it being poor fan fiction are a lot better because at least if you're following the good fan fiction writers, you know they've got a good beta. So it's edited when it's on LiveJournal more likely than when it's on Amazon, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, it's an interesting experience, and I'm very intrigued to see where it's going. And if it was a fandom that I knew well enough to write in, I would probably try it because I want to see the process. As much as I enjoy Vampire Diaries and Pretty Little Liars, big fan of both of those. I'm not in a fanish, as we were discussing before. I'm not fanish enough about them, I feel, to be able to write a coherent.
Yeah, exactly. I watch Vampire Diaries off and on, but I'm not fanish about it. But I mean, I'm curious to see what does happen and what the experience is of the people who decide to do it. I tend to always come down on the side of being very protective of fandom because it is sort of the safe place that has very different norms from the rest of life, which is one of the things that makes it valuable. So just the idea of commoditizing fandom gives me a knee-jerk reaction of, oh, what now? But that's why I avoided weighing in too quickly because I really do want to see how it plays out and what it turns out to be.
Well, and I do think the other thing that's interesting about the 3 properties they chose is those are actually all books that became TV shows that have then become fanish and are sort of now full circle going back around to written text.
It is, which is pretty funny. Yeah.
Because God forbid Supernatural shows up.
I have to say, I really hope Supernatural does not end up on that list. That's just my own personal. I just don't want the powers that be looking over the shoulder of Supernatural writers in any way, shape, or form.
Well, and there's the both sides. It is Warner Brothers behind this, the licensee behind this. But as I said, it's at this point, it's all these Alloy Entertainment related media tie-ins. So it doesn't qualify under that category. It qualifies as Warner Brothers, but not. So, yeah, I think they got a ways to go to see. I mean, obviously, if it's a big hit and it works in everybody's favor, they're going to look at other properties and they're going to want to expand. So, see where that goes. So bringing you back to Supernatural in general, I have to ask you some fanish questions that all Supernatural fans are required to answer.
Certainly.
Which is the fan favorite, Sam or Dean?
Dean. I'm a total Dean girl, and I have been taken to task at times on the Fangasm blog when I do more coverage occasionally. I can't go to everything at every convention, so there have been times when I've covered a Jensen Q&A and haven't been able to go to the Jared Q&A, and I always get slammed for that. So, yeah, people know I'm a Dean girl. But I love Sam. You can't love Dean without loving Sam.
That is true. And I'm in that same position. I literally have had comments on blog posts from people going, there are 2 people in this show, you know. And
I love Jared. Jared is just, personally, I would talk to Jared for hours and hours and hours on end. He is so smart and so thoughtful, and I totally am a Jared girl, too. But Dean, something about the character of Dean, that's what pulled me into this show, and I am still, to this day, fascinated by that character.
I am behind you 100%. How about if we move to secondary characters from any of the bunch? What's your favorite?
Oh, my God. There's so many secondary characters now. That's crazy. I loved Ellen. I really loved Ellen. I would love to see Ellen come back. I don't know what, maybe, she's the sort of sexy older woman, kick-ass hunter. Nothing bad to say about Ellen. And I love Samantha. She's also wonderful. So that's a favorite. Just finished interviewing Rick Worthy, so now I'm having a love affair with the Alpha Vamp because I think that was a wonderful character that had so much potential, and he so wants to come back and finish the exploration of that character that character has now become a favorite for me.
And of course, the joy on Supernatural is anybody can come back. It doesn't even matter if they were killed.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. I love Bobby as a character, although I think it was a gutsy and interesting decision to kill him off, but I do kind of hope he comes back at some point.
And, that reminds me of a small segue. What do you think about Supernatural's also become really known for these meta episodes and poking fun at or laughing along, I guess, depending how you look at it with the fandom?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thoughts on those?
I love the meta episodes. With the exception, if you want to call season 7 Time for a Wedding a meta episode, because I hate that episode with a fiery passion and like to pretend that it doesn't exist. It's not really a meta episode, but because Becky the Fangirl is a character on it, I'm including that. The rest of the meta episodes I absolutely love. I think they struck a wonderful balance in, teasing fandom, but not being mean-spirited. That's why I'm taking season 7 Time for a Wedding out of the discussion.
Exactly.
I think Kripke especially just he understood fandom. At the time we were having a lot of conversation with him because we were really in the thick of writing the book, so we were able to actually converse with him about the early meta episodes. So I knew what his intention was, and I knew that it was affectionate teasing. He made fun of them, the cast, the crew, the writers, himself, fans, everybody across the board, and I thought it was so well done. So basically, I'm a fan.
Do you think the show has really changed much with him not at the helm?
Yeah.
Have you?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I don't think it has changed 100%, but I do think it changed when he left. I think it was a very tough transition to make, to lose the showrunner and creator who he had his hands directly in that for 5 years. And for him to leave after 5 years, I think anybody would have struggled terribly in picking it up and figuring out where to go. So I think everybody made their contribution and did a good job, but I do think it's different. Having the person who created the characters be directly responsible for keeping control of canon and keeping it consistent, and being a fanboy, Kripke's a fanboy, yeah. I think, he kept those first 5 years super tight, and that's unusual.
Thoughts about where the show's going to go, where you'd like it to go for the new season?
Man, I have no idea where it's going to go. As long as Jeremy Carver keeps Sam and Dean being brothers and sacrificing themselves for each other and giving wonderful speeches like, if you ever think anything comes before you, absolutely no, I will be happy. That's really all I ask. You can take it anywhere else you want. Just give me the brothers.
And I think we've had more of that certainly in the last half of this last season, but even this whole last season, I feel like we have finally gone a little bit back to where we used to be. I think so lost
too.
Our way.
I think so too. And I think it was very hard, I think, and very painful. And in retrospect, now I can say maybe that made some kind of theatrical sense to pull the brothers so much apart and have them so at odds. But it was a risk. And they certainly lost some fans because of it. I think they've pulled in so many new fans now because of syndication, and I think they're back on track. But for a while there, it was a little touch and go.
And lastly, is there anything else that you're fanish about this week?
No, I am fandom monogamous. I really am. I use that word, and it is absolutely true. I just don't have the time or emotional energy to be fanish about anything else.
What's on the schedule coming up next? Is there a Vancouver Con coming up?
There is at the end of August. Yep, Vancouver Con. And then there's literally a convention every month or twice a month between August and December.
And they finally gave us LA back. I was at every LA Con until they pulled it to Las Vegas last year, but I hear now we're back in November, which is different.
Back in Burbank in November. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
So I'm going to be really busy in the fall. Starting in August, I'm going to be really busy.
Well, I'll be at that Burbank convention,
so
we'll get to be those fanish people. Yes, they get to see each other face to face.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'll be busy because Fangasm comes out in the beginning of October, and then we have another book, Fan Phenomena Supernatural, which is actually about the show, coming out in February, and that has guest essays written by a bunch of fans, a bunch of academics, and essays by Misha Collins and Richard Spate. So that should be cool.
Excellent! Oh, I'm so excited! I can't wait to see all these things. I'm always a fan of writers and anybody who can sort of put it all on paper and make sense for the rest of us. More power to you.
Back at you.
All right, I'm going to let you head out, and I so appreciate you taking time to chat with us today and all your great insight and all those little teasers you left us for your book. Definitely we're going to have to make sure everybody goes out and buys a copy.
I hope so. I hope so. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Okay, great, Lynn. And tell your partner hi, and I'm sorry we missed it.
I certainly will. Take care.
All
All
right.
right,
Bye bye.
bye.